Welcome back. We are continuing our discussion with Thai Vision Media Stokvel and Burial Society experts Thabiso Masurubele. This time, we are looking ahead at the future of Siyathuthuka, how they can sustain their growth while pursuing their ambitious goals like land purchases, investments, and stronger support for their families. Thabiso, before the break, we were just looking at their risk appetites. And we heard some aspirations of securing property, buying land. Are those good investment vehicles for them to look at right now?
Yeah, I think they are. I mean, any investment, it depends on the current conditions. But when you look at things like land and property, those are fixed assets. So generally speaking, they are good assets. But that doesn't mean to say that there wouldn't be risks associated with that. So, for instance, if you look at property, a lot of groups are looking at investing in property, but not just, residential property and such. They're looking at investment properties that would generate incomes for them. So the immediate risk that stands out there is that if you're going to build, for instance, student accommodation, there's the real risk that you might not get tenants, as in any property industry, You had a lot of property investors go through the most just before COVID and during COVID, where people were sitting with a lot of assets, and then all of a sudden this thing came where people needed to start working at home, and then the property sector took a bit of a hit because people were no longer occupying offices, people working from home. So there are those risks involved in property. But then again, every investment that you make, you've got to make sure that you do thorough research and you engage with the relevant experts to thoroughly do, a feasibility study. So, for instance, if you say, a member comes and says, there's a farm that's available or there's property available, let's invest in student accommodation. Desktop, you might say, I see there are a lot of students always at that gate and accommodation is not enough and so on. But you've got to find out the real numbers. So that might involve, especially with student accommodation, that might involve things like being accredited with, the various institutions, the tertiary institution itself, so that it approves your investment, your property for accommodation. And then there are different ways how you can get the revenue. Some people get it direct from the students. Some people prefer getting it in bulk. So, for instance, you accommodate 100 students, but you're a service provider to the institution. So you're not chasing individual rent payers. You're chasing the institution to make the bulk payment. That, in and of itself, also has a risk, because we've seen property owners saying they haven't been paid by tertiary institutions over a 12-month period, and therefore they're not going to be letting students come in. But you've also seen property owners saying, no, we have been paid and we've seen a decent return on our property. So we always encourage people to say that what looks good might just be good, but just be aware of the potential risks that might happen, so that when those risks do hit you, you have made provision for them. So that even from a sense of expectation and from a sense of budgeting, you've made provision for in case of something of this nature happen.
I don't know if you agree with me here, Tabi. So it seems like property, catering, those are quick investment vehicles that a lot of Stokvel groups go for. What about logistics? Farming, as you were saying, how often do you come across cases like that?
We do actually come across cases. They're not very often, but we do, and those excite us because for starters, they look outside the obvious, for lack of a better phrase. And as you correctly say, I agree with you that people look at things that they can see immediately. When we watch the news, we always read about lack of student accommodation, varsities only able to take X amount of students, but they get 100,000 applications and even the reses. So they look well and good. So people look beyond where their expertise are. So we always encourage people to say, you find a lot of Stokvel members work in logistics, but the group itself doesn't recognize that, there's an opportunity in logistics. Not only is there an opportunity, but they've got an asset within the group, which is a member who understands that business. So that's where the discussion then, you get to interrogate what do you do as a member? What does each member do, If there's a member who works in retail, perhaps that member should then lead and say, this is how retail works. These are the risks in retail. But you're quite right, and I agree with you that there are a lot more opportunities for groups to look at. And that also talks to the issue of, we've had discussions in the past with different government departments to say, guys, stokvels are actually looking at investment opportunities. So, for instance, these different government projects, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's all these things, how can we start making it, available? How can we start making these opportunities available to stokvels to invest? So, for instance, if stokvels want to, be part of constructing RDP houses, can they apply for those tenders because they've got the working capital that's there? And we think it's an area that we can improve on in discussions with government, to say that there's an opportunity to put to good use the money that's sitting in stokvel accounts. Stokvels are sitting with this money, they are looking for investment opportunities, and we are keen to engage with government further on how to optimize those investment opportunities, given that these guys have money to invest.
That's a very insightful there, Thabiso, and I think I found it very funny that they were very strict in making sure that there are no women entering this stokvel because problems will arise. How will that affect their succession planning going forward?
There's no right answer or wrong answer. It's all about the constitution and what you guys decide for yourself. I mean, they've decided for whatever reason, and there's no right and wrong, I think, in our case. They've decided that they want men only, as you say. We see a lot of groups like this, for instance. I mean, there are groups that also say we don't want men. And more of these are more cultural and more traditional-based groups that are there. So in terms of how it would affect their succession, it won't necessarily be a challenge for succession, provided that if their constitution says it's only men, they then, unless they're challenged by women to say this is actually unconstitutional. But let's assume that they say it's only men, and that's what their constitution says. But they are able to then mentor young men to be their sons, to be part of this thing. So, in a way it doesn't, but it would be better if they'd made provision for almost anyone to join their group. Because I think where we sit is you're limiting your skill set. Once you start restricting and saying we want only men, we've encouraged them to say, let's revisit the reasons you say why only men and see if those reasons are still valid, And we've mentioned that, chances are you're denying yourself a lot of skills by excluding other people from participating. You might find that there are people who could add tremendous value to your group and you've excluded them. So you've got to balance those things as a group, but it's not something that you can impose on people. You've got to guide them through for them to realize that, hey, because you then say, Endlin, who manages the budget? Who makes sure that there's groceries, and that's a skill. So you guys, you might add a lot of value and you might be losing out on, great things by having this particular view.
But in essence, men matter as well.
Yes, they do.
Well, that's it from us for this week. If you need guidance for your stokvel or burial society, please feel free to reach out using our contact details on this screen. You can also connect with Thai Vision Media Consultants on social media. Until next time, goodbye. This program is brought to you by Thai Vision Media, helping stokvels and burial societies reach their goals.